Sorry, but first class isn't for you." Alicia Brown, a black nurse, stood frozen as the flight attendant ripped her ticket in half. Right in front of everyone. No one spoke up. No one stepped in. But 15 minutes later, everything changed. When Alicia made a call to someone Gloria never saw coming. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "We cannot walk alone if we are held back by hatred." But will Alicia seek revenge or spark real change? Watch this shocking story now. Alicia Brown moved through the crowd, her posture straight, her steps slow but steady. The light blue scrubs she wore were slightly wrinkled after more than 12 straight hours on her feet. Her dark curls were pulled back, revealing a delicate yet exhausted face. Her deep brown eyes were heavy, dark circles etched beneath them, proof of too many night shifts strung together. She had poured every ounce of herself into the ER, rushing from emergency surgeries to critical care patients, bearing the weight of it all like an invisible boulder on her back. But now, in just a few hours, she would finally be home. The black suitcase trailing behind her felt heavier than usual. Not because it was full, but because she was drained. She wanted one thing: a quiet seat in first class. She wasn't wealthy. She hadn't bought the ticket for luxury. She had bought it because she needed a flight where no one would disturb her. A spacious seat where she could sleep, really sleep, for the first time in days. She reached the check-in counter, where a large sign read, "First Class Check-in." This area was noticeably calmer than the economy section. Leather seating lined. The waiting area, airline staff moved with more polish, and the line was significantly shorter. Alicia stepped into place. Only 2 passengers stood ahead of her, but that didn't mean she would be helped quickly. A brunette in a Navy uniform stood behind the counter, checking a passenger's ticket with a robotic efficiency, professional but completely devoid of warmth. Behind Alicia, a middle-aged white man in a gray suit held his phone in one hand but kept his eyes on her. At first, Alicia didn't notice, but she could feel the look, the way his gaze lingered, scanning her from head to toe. She had seen that look before. She had seen it when a white patient had asked for another nurse instead of letting her tend to him. She had seen it when she entered high-end stores, only to be watched by security. A black woman in scrubs standing in the first-class line, not an image most people were used to. Alicia took a slow, deep breath and forced herself to ignore it. She didn't have the time or the energy to care. Finally, it was her turn. She stepped forward and handed her ticket to the woman at the ED counter. The agent's voice was flat, automatic. "Ticket confirmed. Your boarding gate is B17. The flight will begin boarding in 30 minutes. No hesitation, no questioning glances, just another name on the list." Alicia took back her ticket, offering a faint smile before heading toward security. She passed through smoothly. No issues. But when she entered the first-class lounge, the stares returned. A man in a black suit sitting in the VIP area glanced up, eyes flicking over her before turning away. An older couple sitting nearby exchanged looks as she walked past. No one said anything. No one asked her why she was there. But the judgment was clear in their faces. Alicia wasn't naive. She knew exactly what they were thinking. What is she doing here? A nurse? In first class? She had told herself she was used to this, but it never got easier. Alicia let out a quiet sigh and kept walking toward gate B17. What she didn't know was that the real trouble was still ahead. Alicia pulled her suitcase toward gate B17, where first-class passengers had already begun lining up. The atmosphere here was calmer than in the economy section. Well-dressed men in tailored suits, elegant women with designer handbags, everyone carried themselves with quiet confidence, as if they belonged. She stepped into line, eager to board the flight she had rightfully paid for. But as she reached the ticket checkpoint, that familiar discomfort crept back in. Gloria, the gate agent. A middle-aged woman with neatly pinned blonde hair, a professional demeanor, and just a hint of arrogance. She wasn't just processing tickets. She was curating who belonged in first class. Alicia offered a polite smile and handed over her ticket. Gloria took it, but didn't scan it. Instead, her gaze flickered to the name printed on the ticket. Alicia Brown. A slight pause, almost imperceptible. Then her eyes lifted to Alicia's face, scanning her from head to toe. The light blue scrubs, the simple sneakers. A beat of hesitation, not obvious, but enough for Alicia to notice. Gloria arched a brow, her tone laced with skepticism. "Are you sure you're in the right place? First class isn't for people like you." The air around them shifted. A few passengers nearby glanced up. Others exchanged curious looks. Alicia wasn't surprised. She had encountered this tone before. Subtle, cutting, wrapped in the false. Politeness of mistaken concern. But that didn't mean she would accept it. Her expression remained calm, steady. "I booked a first-class ticket 2 weeks ago." Gloria still didn't scan the ticket. She stared at Alicia as if waiting for her to flinch, to hesitate, to back down. When Alicia didn't, Gloria's lips curled into a dry, amused smile. "Is that so?" she drawled before finally sliding the ticket over the scanner. Beep. The confirmation tone was unmistakable. But instead of returning the ticket, Gloria deliberately pressed a few buttons on the screen, pretending to check something. The delay was intentional. Alicia felt it. Behind her, an older man checked his watch. A young woman whispered something to her travel companion. No one said a word, but they were watching. Finally, Gloria looked up, crossing her arms. "Strange," she mused, feigning surprise. "I don't recall seeing you on our list of frequent first-class passengers." Alicia's grip tightened slightly on her bag, but her voice remained composed. "I didn't realize I had to be on a list to buy a ticket." Gloria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You seem very confident." Alicia didn't reply right away. She simply held Gloria's gaze. A flicker of something, uncertainty maybe, flashed across Gloria's face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same smug superiority. A nearby airline employee shifted, uncomfortably, but said nothing. A passenger behind Alicia let out a quiet sigh, impatient. Still, Alicia didn't move. She waited. Waited to see how far Gloria was willing to take this. What she didn't know was that, in just a few minutes, things would spiral far beyond either of their control. Gate B-17 buzzed with the quiet elegance of first-class travelers preparing to board. Polished shoes, designer luggage, whispered conversations, all a picture of refinement. But amidst that sophistication, a cruel performance was unfolding at the IE ticket counter. Alicia stood firm, though beneath the surface, a tide of injustice rose within her. Gloria still hadn't returned her ticket. Her gaze swept over Alicia's scrubs once more, as if they didn't belong in this space. "Perhaps you booked the wrong seat," Gloria said, her tone neutral but laced with something sharper. "I'm afraid this ticket isn't valid." Alicia felt the weight of every gaze settling on her, but she refused to shrink beneath it. "My ticket is completely valid," she replied, her voice unwavering. Gloria shrugged, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips as if she held all the power in this moment. "Systems can make mistakes," she mused, still refusing to rescan the ticket. Alicia understood the game now. This wasn't about a seat. This was about a message. "You don't belong here." A long silence stretched between them. Then, Gloria spoke again, this time louder, loud enough for everyone around them to hear. "Are you sure you qualify for first class?" The words landed like a verdict. A nearby businessman narrowed his eyes, intrigued. An older woman glanced at Alicia, discomfort flickering across her face, but no one spoke. Alicia's grip tightened around her bag, but her expression remained calm. "I didn't realize I needed to prove my worth to you," she said, her tone cool, each word razor-sharp. Gloria let out a quiet, humorless laugh. And then, in front of everyone, she lifted Alicia's ticket and ripped it in half. Rip. The sound was deafening. It was more than paper being torn. It was dignity, shredded for the world to see. Silence swallowed the gate. A man in a gray suit parted his lips, as if to say something, then closed them again. A young woman pulled out her phone, uncertain whether to record or simply to do something. Gloria looked down at Alicia, triumph flashing in her eyes. "Perhaps you should return to economy," she said, each syllable slow and deliberate, meant to cut deep, if you can afford it. The torn pieces of the ticket fluttered to the counter, fell to the floor, and Alicia felt herself being discarded with them. The weight of every stare pressed down on her. Some were sympathetic, some were merely curious, most were the silence of those who didn't want to get involved. No one defended her. No one stepped forward. Alone, in a crowd of people. Alicia slowly crouched down, picking up each piece of the ticket. Her movements were calm, deliberate. Gloria wanted a reaction. She wanted anger, an outburst, but Alicia didn't give her the satisfaction. She inhaled deeply, feeling the sharp burn of humiliation settle in her chest like ice water. But she did not let it drown her. Straightening her spine, she pulled out her phone. She didn't look at Gloria. She didn't need to, because the real storm was just beginning. Late afternoon, airline headquarters inside a grand, high-ceilinged conference room. The polished glow of overhead lights reflected off a dark mahogany table where Walter Brown sat with the board of directors. Black and gray suits, thick stacks of documents, the air thick with the gravity of high-level discussions. Walter Brown was not a man easily rattled. At 55, he was a pillar of strength, an ex-pilot who had flown some of the most dangerous missions, a man whose authority didn't require raised voices to command attention. But just as one of the board members was presenting a critical report, the door cracked open. A quiet but firm voice cut through the meeting. "Mr. Brown, your daughter is calling." Walter's sharp eyes flicked to the screen. Alicia. A cold instinct ran down his spine. Alicia never called him during work hours, not unless it was serious. He didn't hesitate. Without a word, he picked up his phone, rose from his seat, and walked out of the conference room. The door shut behind him, leaving behind curious but silent glances. Walter answered. "Alicia." His voice was deep, steady, a rock in the middle of a storm. On the other end, Alicia's voice came through, calm, controlled. But beneath it was something sharp, cold. "Dad, I need you here. Now." Walter's jaw tightened. This wasn't something small. What happened? His voice dropped a note, more command than question. Alicia didn't waste words. They tore up my ticket, right in front of everyone. A sharp, ice-cold anger sliced through his chest. Walter exhaled slowly. His grip on the phone tightened. His gaze darkened. A heavy pause. Then his response came, low and unwavering. "Stay where you are. I'm on my way. No panic, no unnecessary words, just power." Before Alicia could respond, he hung up. Then he pulled out another phone and dialed. Richard, JFK International Airport, Operations Office. Richard Coleman, the airport's operations manager, stood in his office, reviewing flight logs. He was a careful man. In aviation, problems needed to be handled quickly, quietly. No unnecessary noise, no scandals. But when his desk phone rang and Walter Brown's name flashed across the screen, his heart skipped a beat. He answered immediately. "Mr. Brown, how can I assist you?" Walter's voice cut through. "Pull the security footage from gate B17. "Now!" Richard stiffened. "Is there a problem, sir?" Walter's voice remained calm, but carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken warnings. "I want to see exactly what happened to my daughter." Richard's stomach dropped. Walter Brown's daughter? His mouth went dry. He forced himself to keep his tone neutral. "Are you certain?" Walter didn't let him finish. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. The finality in his voice left no room for argument. A tense silence hung in the air. Richard swallowed hard and inhaled sharply. "I'll look into it right away, sir." "Do it." Click. Walter ended the call. Richard slowly lowered the receiver. His hand trembled slightly. Then he spun on his heel, looking toward the security team. "Pull up the footage from gate B17. Now!" His voice was tight, urgent. Within seconds, the security team rewound the footage, and there, on the screen, in crystal clear detail, Gloria ripping up Alicia Brown's first-class ticket. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He sat down, watching in silence as the scene unfolded. A pit of cold dread settled in his stomach. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a disaster waiting to explode. Airline headquarters, Walter didn't rush, but every step he took was measured, firm, deliberate. He grabbed his coat, pushed open the sleek glass doors, and strode toward the waiting car. The driver opened the door, but Walter said nothing. He simply slid into the seat, closed the door, and looked straight ahead. His jaw was set, his eyes dark and unreadable. Walter Brown had spent a lifetime fighting against barriers, facing prejudice, proving wrong the people who thought they could decide who belonged where. But no one would do that to his daughter. The car pulled onto the highway, straight toward JFK Airport. In 15 minutes, Gloria would face a storm she never saw coming. Inside the operations office, Richard Coleman set his coffee down as a security officer rushed toward him, urgency etched into his face. "Sir, you need to see this. Now!" His voice was low but strained. A knot tightened in Richard's chest. He walked over to the surveillance monitors, where another staff member was already rewinding the footage from gate B17, and then there it was. The moment played out in crystal-clear detail. Gloria taking Alicia's ticket, glancing at the name, then scanning her up and down with that cold, calculating stare. She said something. There was no audio, but her body language spoke volumes. Skepticism. Challenge. Then came the moment no one could deny. Gloria raised the IE ticket, tore it in half, and tossed the pieces onto the counter, right in front of Alicia. A sharp inhale came from one of the staff members watching, as if they had just witnessed a car crash. Sweat beaded at Richard's temple. He braced his hands against the control panel, eyes locked onto the screen as Alicia bent down, quietly picking up the torn pieces. No tears, but the pain in her posture was unmistakable. The silence in the room was suffocating, until one of the security officers hesitated before speaking. "Sir," he stopped, as if debating whether to continue. Richard snapped his head toward him, irritation flickering in his eyes. "What?" The officer swallowed hard. "We've received reports that some passengers recorded the incident on their phones." He hesitated again. "If those videos go viral..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Richard leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. As if he had just been pulled into a storm he could no longer control. The airline's reputation was on the line, but more than that, Walter Brown was already on his way. Richard ran a hand over his temples, forcing himself to think. Ignoring this? Not an option. Protecting Gloria? Impossible. Handling it quietly? Too late. His eyes flashed with urgency as he straightened. "Bring Gloria to the conference room. Now!" His voice was sharper than usual, but don't tell her why. A staff member immediately hurried out of the office. The others exchanged uneasy glances. Richard wasn't done. His tone hardened. "One more thing. When Mr. Brown arrives, bring him straight to me. No delays. No waiting." The team nodded, moving swiftly to carry out his orders. Richard let out a slow breath, but his gaze remained fixed on the monitor. Gloria was still at the gate, going about her job as if nothing had happened. She had no idea. She had just walked into a storm she wouldn't escape. Gloria stood tall, her sharp eyes scanning the next passenger's ticket with cool indifference. There was no trace of hesitation, no flicker of guilt. If anything, she looked more confident, more self-assured, as if she had just reinforced her authority, as if she had just put someone back in their place. When a well-dressed white man approached, Gloria's expression shifted instantly. She beamed. Her voice softened into something almost pleasant. "Good evening, Mr. Wilson. I hope you have a wonderful flight." The man nodded, unaware of the stark contrast in her demeanor. But not everyone was oblivious. Gloria might have pretended that nothing had happened, but the people around her had seen. Middle-aged woman in an expensive suit cast a glance at Gloria before whispering something to her companion. A young man in a polo shirt subtly pulled out his phone, scrolling through a short video he had just recorded. Further away, an airport. Staff member stood stiffly, his expression torn between unease and hesitation. He had witnessed the entire thing. He knew what Gloria had done was wrong, but he also knew how the system worked, and he knew it wouldn't protect someone like Alicia. So, he lowered his gaze, clenched his jaw, and chose to do nothing. But not everyone chose silence. A man in a brown coat, holding a carry-on suitcase, passed by Alicia. Without stopping, without even turning his head, he murmured under his breath, "I recorded everything. If you decide to press charges, I'll testify." Alicia blinked, momentarily surprised. She gave a slight nod, but she said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Not yet. She didn't confront Gloria. She didn't demand justice right here, right now. She simply moved to a nearby waiting chair, her hand resting lightly on the strap of her bag. Her expression was calm, but in her eyes, a quiet, unyielding certainty burned. The anger had settled. The humiliation had faded. What remained was cold resolve, because she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. A storm was coming, and Gloria had no idea. The glass doors of the VIP lounge swung open, and in an instant, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Walter Brown had arrived, tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying the unyielding presence of a steel wall. He moved with a deliberate, measured force. At 55, he still held the commanding air of a former fighter pilot, a man who had navigated through danger and never once wavered. Two assistants followed closely behind him, their faces set in rigid focus, awaiting orders. Near the entrance, Aide, young airport employee's mouth parted slightly in shock. His eyes widened before he quickly turned to whisper to his colleague, "Oh my God, that's Walter Brown." The name, even when spoken in hushed tones, sent a ripple through the room. A few first-class passengers, mid-sip of their wine, subtly paused, their gazes shifting toward the man who had just entered. Several airport staff instinctively straightened their postures. Some even stood, offering small nods of acknowledgement. But Walter didn't slow down. He didn't acknowledge the stares. His focus was locked on one man, Richard. The airport director stood frozen, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. Richard Coleman had managed this airport for years. He had handled VIPs, corporate executives, and even government officials. But he had never felt pressure like this. Walter Brown didn't need to raise his voice to make his presence known. His presence itself did that. Richard forced himself to inhale, steadying his nerves, and quickly stepped forward. He dipped his head slightly in a gesture of respect. "Mr. Brown," he began carefully, making sure his voice remained steady. "I deeply regret the inconvenience. Walter didn't let him finish. "Where is the flight attendant?" 4 words, cold, sharp, undeniable. Richard swallowed hard. His pulse picked up. "Sir," he started, choosing his words carefully. "She's still at gate B17. Walter said nothing, just gave a single firm nod, curt, final, before continuing forward, straight toward the gate. The airport staff standing nearby instantly stepped aside, as if afraid that even a second of delay would pull them into the storm about to unfold. Even the VIP passengers, people accustomed to privilege and exclusivity, turned their heads. There was an energy in the air, a feeling that something big was about to happen. Near the boarding area, a young flight attendant whispered nervously to her colleague. "What's going on?" Her colleague shook his head, voice barely above a breath. "I don't know, but I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of it." Richard followed behind Walter, keeping a few paces back, close enough to be there, not close enough to stand as his equal. One thought repeated in his mind: Gloria has no idea who she's about to face. Near gate B17, a businessman in a black suit sat in one of the waiting chairs, flipping through a newspaper. When Walter strode past, he lowered the paper, eyes narrowing in interest. A young woman, scrolling through her phone, suddenly stopped. She turned to her friend, whispering, "What's happening? Who is he?" Her friend glanced up, and then she inhaled sharply. "That's Walter Brown." The young woman blinked, confused. "So?" Her friend's voice dropped into something between awe and disbelief. "He's the chief operating officer of this airline." She exhaled slowly. "And if he's here like this, it means something huge is about to go down." A beat of silence. Then, both women turned their heads, watching, because whatever was about to happen at gate B17, it was something no one had seen before. Gloria stood at the ticket checkpoint, her posture still confident, if not more arrogant, after the incident with Alicia. Everything carried on as usual. Passengers continued presenting their tickets, a few casting her puzzled glances, but no one said a word. Then a young airport staff member in a gray uniform approached, his face tense. He glanced at Gloria hesitantly, then leaned in and whispered, "The manager needs to see you." Immediately. Gloria frowned, lifting her chin slightly, as if irritated at being interrupted. "Why?" she asked, her tone edged with annoyance. The staffer pressed his lips together, eyes darting away, clearly unwilling to meet her gaze. "It's important. Right now." Gloria let out a scoff, a mocking chuckle escaping her lips, and waved a hand as if brushing off a minor inconvenience. She wasn't worried. In her mind, this was probably just a passenger complaint, nothing worth her attention. "Fine," she said, stepping away from the counter with unshaken confidence, unaware that she was walking straight into the most dangerous moment of her life. She entered the internal meeting room with that same smug smile still on her lips. But the moment her eyes swept across the room, the smile froze instantly. Right in front of her, seated at the head of the table like a judge waiting for the accused, was Walter Brown. No one had to say a word. Gloria's body stiffened on the spot, her face drained of color, one hand instinctively clenched into a fist. No more arrogance, no more confidence. Walter didn't speak right away. He simply sat there, eyes sharp as blades, staring at Gloria like he could see straight through her soul. The silence in the room was so heavy, it felt like you could hear a pin drop. Then Walter finally spoke, slowly, each word dropping like stones onto the cold floor. "Do you know what you've just done?" His voice was low, not loud, but it carried a weight that could crush any excuse Gloria might have prepared. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her chest tightened, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Without waiting for a response, Walter reached toward the table, where a folder had already been placed. He pushed it forward, slowly but deliberately. "This is a copy of Alicia Brown's ticket," he said, eyes locked on hers. "First class, completely valid." Gloria froze, her eyes glued to the ticket like it was a death sentence. Standing beside him, Richard no longer wore a neutral expression. He took a deep breath, then turned the computer screen toward Gloria, revealing the airport security footage. And then came the moment Gloria would never forget. On the screen, it was unmistakable. She was holding Alicia's ticket, tearing it up right in front of her. The room vanished into silence. Gloria felt the blood drain from her face. She could hear the thunder of her heartbeat in her chest, feel the sweat beading on her temple. There was no escape, no way to spin this. Richard folded his arms, voice colder than ever. "You've committed a serious violation of customer service protocol," he said, eyes stern. She stammered, her voice faltering. "No, I was just following procedure. I didn't mean to." Walter blinked slowly, a flicker of disbelief crossing his eyes. "You didn't mean to," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave. Gloria nodded rapidly, her hands beginning to tremble, but still trying to explain. I didn't think she really had a valid ticket." The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had made a fatal mistake. Walter tilted his head, his gaze darkening. "You didn't think my daughter had a valid ticket?" he repeated, each word like a knife. Gloria went still. She wanted to take it back, but it was too late. Walter nodded slowly, as if he finally saw everything clearly. He turned to Richard, voice like steel. "I want her suspended. Immediately." Gloria inhaled sharply, ready to object, but Richard didn't hesitate. "Ms. Gloria," he said firmly, "you are officially suspended from duty as of this moment." 1 week later, a soft glow lit up the large screen, casting a clear message across the room. Anti-discrimination and airline service. Reform training program. The atmosphere was solemn, but not tense. Walter Brown stood before the lineup of flight attendants, his hands clasped calmly in front of him, his gaze steady and authoritative. He waited a few seconds, ensuring absolute silence before he began to speak. 6 months ago, an incident at JFK Airport changed the way we view customer service. No one in the room needed him to elaborate. Some shifted in their seats, others furrowed their brows, not out of annoyance, but because they knew this was real. Walter scanned the room, his voice calm, resolute. "We came to realize that the standard of this industry isn't measured by luxury or speed, it's measured by how we treat every passenger, regardless of their skin color, gender, or social status." A few of the younger attendants nodded. Others sat quietly, deep in thought. Walter continued, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much injustice. "That's why we've implemented this mandatory training program, not just to avoid repeating past mistakes, but to create a more just environment for everyone." A soft murmur rippled through the room as Alicia Brown stepped up beside him. Gone was the nurse's uniform from her long, exhausted shifts. Today, she wore a simple, clean-cut suit, confident and composed. She was no longer the woman humiliated at the boarding gate. She was the woman who changed the system. Alicia took the microphone, inhaled deeply, and looked out at the attendants before her. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today." All eyes turned to her, a few heads tilting slightly, listening closely. "I was just a passenger, someone who booked a first-class ticket and hoped for a peaceful flight like anyone else." She paused for a moment, her gaze drifting down to her hands, as if she could still feel the torn edges of that ticket. "But I learned something important. Fairness doesn't happen on its own. It has to be fought for." Silence fell over the room like a thick curtain. Some attendants exchanged glances, as if they just heard something deeper than they expected. Alicia narrowed her eyes slightly, a brief smile playing on her lips, then continued, "And today, I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to talk about the future." She pointed to the screen behind her, where the training program title remained. "I hope you do better than those who came before you. I hope you never have to witness what I went through. And most importantly," she paused, locking eyes with them, "I hope you'll have the courage to speak up when you see injustice." When the session ended, the attendants rose slowly, some lost in thought, others whispering among themselves about what they'd just heard. A young flight attendant, not much older than a college student, with bright eyes and a thoughtful expression, approached Alicia. She hesitated for a second, then looked Alicia in the eye and said softly, "I saw the video. Thank you for standing up." Alicia didn't answer right away. She simply looked back at the girl, then gave a quiet, firm nod. "I didn't stand alone," she replied, her voice low but unwavering. "Now it's your turn." The young woman smiled faintly, then turned and walked away, blending into the group exiting the room. Walter stood beside Alicia, taking it all in. Then he gave her a small nod. No words needed. They both knew they had done something bigger than themselves. Thank you for following this story. This isn't just about a torn ticket. It's about the fight for justice, about finding the courage to speak up against injustice, and about how real change often begins with the smallest actions. Have you Ever witnessed or experienced something unfair? Something like what happened to Alicia? What would you do in that situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in protecting fairness, if you believe in the power of speaking out, like this video and subscribe to the channel to help us spread stories that matter. Because sometimes one person standing up can change an entire system. And today, that person could be you.